Leaves do photosynthesis. Okay? Photosynthesis is the process by which a plant makes its food. They are flat and they are wide shaped because they need to absorb the maximum amount of sunlight. They are green. Chlorophyll is the enzyme, chemical substance inside of plants that is green and that makes the plants green. All right. The leaves bring in the carbon dioxide gas from the atmosphere and release the oxygen gas to the atmosphere through pores that are called stomata. The purpose of the stem has a couple different purposes. One of its purposes is to hold up the leaves. Right? It's what the leaves are attached to, and most plants grow upward, and it has that. It's to hold up those leaves so the leaves can get to the sun. All right, but within the stem, we have the vascular system. Now this is important. Vascular system, we're talking about tubes. Kind of like in humans, the cardiovascular system. Again, we're talking about the vascular system, the tube. Just like in humans, these are for transporting fluids. First tube is called the xylem. And it moves water, our good old H2O, and minerals, but it only moves them upwards. Only goes up the leaf, up the stem. And it moves from the roots to the leaves and the flowers. Okay, so the xylem moves the water. The other one is called the phloem, spelled with a PH. Okay. The phloem moves food. And plant food, we're talking about glucose, sometimes sucrose, and it can move up or down the stem depending upon where the plant needs it. To help you remember xylem and phloem, that phloem moves the food. So that F sound from the PH in the phloem and food, the phloem moves the food. What's the purpose of roots? Well, their major purpose is to absorb water. This is how the plant gets the water, through the roots. It also absorbs minerals. Any mineral that the plant needs, it gets from the soil and absorbs through the roots. Now, in some plants, not all, but in some plants, it can actually be a great source of storage, okay? Of extra food, all right? Extra glucose, usually in the form of starch. So we're talking about those carbohydrates, all right? That simple carbohydrate, monosaccharide, complex carbohydrate, polysaccharide, starch. And another purpose of the roots, a very important one, is to anchor the plant. Hold it in the soil so it doesn't fall over, so it doesn't wash away. Going back to this idea of the extra storage. If you look at roots, sometimes in the roots of a plant, you'll find something like a potato. Okay? That potato is the storage. Carrots, radishes, onions, and beets, these are all vegetables that grow in the roots. These are all roots of a plant. So the leaf does the photosynthesis, making the glucose. Extra glucose that the plant isn't using right away can get sent down through the phloem into the roots, and then it gets converted into starch, for example, in a potato. All right, carrots, onions, radishes, beets, these are all filled with complex carbohydrates that are storage for the plant. Plants have hormones, and these hormones are very important for the plant's growth. The most common example is auxin. Auxin is a plant hormone vital for its growth. Cytokinins, gibberellins, ethylene are all also hormones that deal with plant growth. Something about its growth, something about reproduction, something about development. Like ethylene, this has to do with the ripening of the fruit or the vegetable, okay? These hormones are transported through the xylem and the phloem. The vascular system, including the xylem and the phloem, those tubes, all right? Remember, the xylem transports the water, the phloem transports the food, the glucose. The vascular system is what transports the hormones. So the hormones can be made in one part of the plant, like in the roots, and then be transported to the leaves. They're usually made in one part of the plant and transported to another part of the plant through that vascular system, okay? So plant reproduction, okay? Reproduction, we're talking about making babies, making the next generation of plants, okay? How does a plant do that? Well, not all plants do it the same way. The plants that create flowers, the flowering plants, all right? Plants that do flowering, this is a form of sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction means that we have two parents, all right? This is the best way to do reproduction for the plant. The plant has sometimes the option to do some asexual reproduction, which we'll talk about in a minute. But this is ideal because it creates more genetic variety for the offspring. The flower becomes a fruit. This is something that so many people don't understand. You see a beautiful flower on a tree and it's like, oh, what a pretty flower. And it gets pollinated by a bee, and that flower, then it dies. The flower doesn't die. The petals fall off, but the base of that flower grows and develops into what becomes the fruit. A fruit is anything with seeds in it. So the flower becomes a fruit. So a fruit is basically a mature plant uterus. It's filled with the fertilized seeds. Seeds are plant embryos. Genetic variety within a species results in better survival. The more variety, the better chance of survival. We're avoiding extinction. Extinction can also happen to plants, not just animals. All right, the species of plants. So we're avoiding extinction because the species is better able to adapt. That genetic variety, more genetic options, and therefore it can make changes to its environment. All right, so we're talking about evolution. We're talking about natural selection. All right, this applies to plants as well, that genetic variety within the plants. Now, a few terms. Pollination. The flower gets pollinated. All right, pollination is synonymous to fertilization. Fertilization is when the male and the female gametes come together. The egg and the sperm come together. That's fertilization. In other words, we're just talking about sex. Pollination is fertilization is sex. Okay? We are combining the genetics of two parents. And we combine those genetics of the two parents to be able to produce offspring. The offspring, talking about babies. So we're making babies by combining the genetics of two parents. All right? That is fertilization. Then we're talking about a flowering plant. We call it pollinization. Okay, we're going to start over here. We've got a pretty flower. If you're looking at the flower, the inside of the flower, what's on the inside? The petals on the outside, the pretty part, is for attracting the pollinators, like the bees and other insects and some birds. It attracts the pollinators. That's what the petals are for. What needs to happen is the pollinization. So the different parts. Let's look at the female parts first, because those are the most visible. All right, so pink for female. The very center, you're going to see this thing sticking out. And if you were to cut it in half, you would actually see inside of it what looks like to become seeds. All right, those, where that very base of it, that's the ovary. All right, that's just like in females and humans, that's where the eggs are stored. This is where the eggs are stored. This style is the tube, and the stigma is the part where the pollen is going to get in. All right, this is where the male part's going to go in, the male gamete. So the stigma, and the stigma actually happens to be kind of sticky, but those three pieces together make up the pistil. That's the female. This is the female portion of the flower. We have both male and female in the flower. Okay, so that's the female part. What's surrounding it is the male part. These, and the little stand they're on, all right, these are called anthers. Right there, that's an anther. the little stem thing it's on is called the filament. Those parts right there, those are the male part. So, looking at that, zooming in, it's the same thing right here. This is just that, but zoomed in. The stigma. Here's the male part. The filament. The anther. Okay, so that's this right here. And the anther is covered with pollen. The pollen grain is the equivalent to sperm. That is the male gamete. All right, so the anther with the filament together is called the stamen. This is all the male. And you've noticed we got 1, 2, 3, 4 male parts. You'll have a single female part. You may have multiple male parts. Now, what happens is this pollen detaches from the anther and attaches to the stigma. And then it attaches to the stigma. It will go down the pollen tube and it will fertilize one of the ovules down here. A little note on the stigma. This is covered in nectar. Nectar is sticky. That's how the pollen sticks to the stigma. The nectar is also the source of food for the pollinators. Bees go to the flower for the nectar, not for the pollen. The pollen just happens to be the thing that they move around. What they're really going for is the nectar. Now, once each egg gets fertilized by a pollen grain, it develops and develops and develops, and we get the seed. The seed is the plant embryo. Okay, it's not a baby yet. Once it gets planted, has a chance to grow, gets the water it needs, and starts to grow, that is the seedling. The seedling is a baby. The sun is shining. Ooh, nice bright sunlight. And the sun's trying to get down. And the sunlight doesn't get to the seedlings because of the shade of the tree. And if they don't get enough sun, little seedlings die. Now, what if one of them happened to get enough sun and it starts to grow and it starts to grow and it starts to grow and it starts to grow? Now, the mama tree, who has her roots all over the place, and the baby tree are now going to compete for resources. They're going to compete for water. As it gets bigger, they're going to compete for light. They're going to compete for resources. Competition between mother and child. This is not good. All right? So, this is why the plants are designed, the seeds are in fruits, so they get eaten and taken someplace else, so they can spread all over the place, and we don't have the competition between the parent plant and the baby plant. Now, these are the common examples. There are many examples, but seed dispersal, we are moving seeds to a new location to avoid competition with the parent plant, so that mama plant and baby plant are not competing for the same resources like sunlight and water. All right. Wind is one way that seeds can be dispersed. So we go here to the picture. You see the dandelion? That right there is a seed, a seed, a seed, another seed. Each seed has its own little parachute. So that seed has its own little parachute. The wind comes and poof, blows it away. That seed has its own little parachute and the wind comes poof and blows it away. Are using some sort of a spike. Okay, so right here, burrgrass. Inside of that, there are seeds. This thing attaches to the fur of another animal, of an animal that's walking by, and then the animal, wherever the animal walks and scratches it off, now the seed pod drops someplace else. In the apple, there's the seeds inside of the apple. Fruit is another method of seed dispersal. Seeds inside the fruit. Animals eat the fruit. Seeds survive the digestive system. And then the seeds are deposited, all right, deposited, aka pooped out, into fertilizer. So this is the actual extra cool thing about it. The poop is actually fertilizer. All right, remember talking about the nitrogen cycle and those nutrients? that's ready to start fertilizing, and those seeds can start growing in that fertilizers. Plant propagation. Some plants don't use flowers. If they don't use flowers, they have some other way of reproducing. Now, there are many forms of propagation. There are some, for example, some trees, you can just cut a branch off of it and stick that branch in water, and it starts to grow roots, and it becomes a new tree. I mean, it's really cool. All right, there's other plants like potatoes. You take a potato and you chop it up into pieces, and you put those pieces in the ground, and each one of them becomes a new potato plant. So lots of different ways that plants can propagate, okay? So all you have to do is you need a piece or a part of the parent plant, and it's used to create a new plant, and that new plant is the offspring, the baby. This is a form of asexual reproduction. So that A right there, asexual, means not sex. In other words, one parent. This is just one parent, which means that this one parent passes its genes on to a new plant. That new plant is just like the parent plant. It has the same genetics. Basically, the offspring are just a clone of the parent. This results in less genetic diversity. Variety is what? Good. Less variety, not so good, okay? It's still reproducing. Reproduction is good, but less genetic diversity, not the best option. This is one form of plant propagation. So you start over here with the main plant, the parent plant, okay? That plant's growing, it has its stem, it has its leaves, it has its own little root system. It's a happy growing plant. Then to do this propagation, it will put out what's called a runner or a stolon. This is a stem, but instead of growing up, it grows to the side. And it grows out, and when it touches the ground, new roots will start to form and new vertical stems with their own leaves. And then that one will put out a runner, and when it hits the ground, new roots and new stems with new leaves. Each one of these is a unique new plant. That very, very end right there, that new runner that's looking to find a place to put down roots, that's called a bud. All right? Now, here's the really interesting thing about this. If you were to take a pair of scissors and snip that runner, cut that stem. Normally when you cut a stem on a plant, you're like, oh no, something's going to die. Nothing dies. There's no vital nutrients moving through that runner because each plant has everything it needs. That's why they're separate plants. That makes them separate plants.
Tropism, plants responding to their environment. So, tropism, scientific word, means to turn or to bend. Okay, so we have tropism. When we're talking about tropism, we're talking about how plants respond to their environment. There are 4 types of tropism: phototropism, hydrotropism, thigmotropism, and gravitropism. So let's look at the prefixes on each one of those words. Photo means light. So a plant responding to light makes sense. They need it to survive. Hydrotropism. Hydro means water. How plants respond to water. Thigmotropism. Thigmo means touch. So how plants respond to touch. And gravitropism, plants actually respond to gravity as well. So let's look at these one at a time, starting with phototropism. Phototropism, again, light, to bend towards the light. Stems and leaves of a plant will bend towards light. We call this positive phototropism. So in a plant in normal circumstances, the light is all around, the sun moves through the sky, and so it gets an even exposure of light on all sides of the plant. And plants will grow straight up, and the roots will grow straight down. However, if you take that plant and you put it inside of a box or a room, and you have a single source of light from like a window, the stem, as it grows, look how it bends toward that source of light. Look how the little stems for each leaf has bent so the leaves are facing the light, trying to get as much light as possible. Remember, light is a source of energy for plants. But notice also the roots. The roots demonstrate negative phototropism because the roots bend away from the light. So as the roots grow, if there's some sort of light getting to that soil, the roots will grow the opposite direction. That is phototropism. All right, so first one was phototropism. Second one, hydrotropism. Hydro meaning water. So roots bend or grow towards water, which totally makes sense because they need water. Plants need water to grow. So we have a plant here, and we can see its roots, a water source. So this is a pot that slowly leaks water into the soil. So the soil over here is really moist, where the soil over here is pretty dry. And if we watch the roots growing, we will see that the roots grow towards that water. Once they find that water, they're going to keep growing towards it and growing towards it. That direction of the roots growing toward, it's the plant responding to the water in its environment. Hydrotropism. Okay, so there's hydrotropism. Thigmotropism. Thigmo meaning touch. So how does the plants respond to touch? Now this isn't all plants. This is just some plants. There are 3 different types. First example are vines. So vines are plants that grab onto other things. Most of them have these little tendril type stems. They wrap around other objects, and that provides stability for a weaker stem on that plant, and it helps to grow taller and taller and taller, higher and higher up. And the higher up you are, the more sunlight you get. All right, so here's another example where the main stem actually wraps around. All right, and here's another example. The tendrils wrapping really, really tight around that pole, and so the rest of the normal stems can hold the leaves up and the plant can grow taller and taller. Okay, another example of thigmotropism is a mimosa plant. Mimosa plants respond to touch. So the leaves here, these little tiny leaves on there called leaflets, and if you touch that plant anywhere along there, it responds, and those leaflets bend in and they fold up, and the leaf almost disappears. It's hard to say exactly what benefit this has, but it might look wilted, less tasty. It can kind of hide it amongst some other plants. So it's a defense mechanism for the plant. All right, a third form of tropism, thigmotropism, is carnivorous plants. These have specialized leaves that close around insects to digest them. So this is a Venus flytrap, and those are 2 leaves, and the fly gets trapped inside. So if you look at the inside, they have these 3 little hairs there. Those are called the trigger hairs. Those hairs, if they get touched, they cause these 2 leaves to bend in. So some sort of insect crawls in there and it triggers it, and it takes a few moments, but it closes down, and these little fringed hairs kind of hold them in, kind of provide the trap, and it gets tighter and tighter and tighter, and then it produces some digestive enzymes and dissolves that poor little unsuspecting insect. But the reason why is not to get calories or energy from the insect, but to get nitrogen, the nutrient that plants normally get from the soil. They have found an adaptation to be able to suck it out of insects that they capture. Pretty fascinating. All right, so those are our 3 forms of thigmotropism. So the vine tendrils, the mimosa plant closing up, and our carnivorous plants. Last form of tropism, gravitropism. So talking about gravity, bending. The plant bends because of gravity. So stems and leaves grow up against the pull of gravity. That's called negative gravitropism because it goes against the direction of gravity. Whereas roots grow down with gravity, a positive gravitropism. So normal growth, stem goes straight up, roots grow straight down. However, what happens if the pot gets knocked over and the plant continues to grow? The plant, how does it respond to gravity? Well, interestingly enough, the stem will bend so that the rest of the plant is growing upright. And the roots, interestingly enough, will start growing down. The new growth on those roots will go downward. So it's responding to gravity. a negative gravitropism because it's going against gravity, and a positive gravitropism because it's going with gravity. So those are our 4 tropisms. Remember, tropisms, we are talking about plants responding to their environment. Phototropism, hydrotropism, thigmotropism, and gravitropism.